we are going to make some gravy, and I'm going to show you two different kinds or two different ways of making gravy and some of the very basics on it. I don't care about cooking as much as some people. The reason that I cook is because I feel like that there is a benefit. There's a health benefit and a financial benefit. And when you have dinners around the table, there's just a family bonding benefit. And so that's why I cook. It has absolutely nothing to do with like some strong maternal desire to, I don't even know. It's because it's something that has benefits and I like those benefits. Because I'm pretty sure that if I came up with a cookbook, it would have to be named something like Trying Not to Starve to Death on Good Home Cooking. I have no idea what I'm saying. Today I have some leftover turkey that I need to use up, and I decided that what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little bit of gravy, chop up the turkey and put it in the gravy, and then freeze it in meal-sized sections that I can take out and use as a topping on top of, I don't know, rice or potatoes or noodles or mashed potatoes, or yeah, potatoes are pretty good, so you gotta name those twice, obviously. This is a good way to use up the leftover turkey and a good way to have a couple freezer meals. So this is our leftover turkey, and I'm just gonna chop it up. Now, I don't know about you, but I lose a lot of hair, and so when I'm cooking, a lot of times I will pull my hair back into a ponytail so I'm less likely to get it in my food. Now, it's not important to cut it up all the way because it kind of flakes apart. And so as you stir the gravy and things like that, it'll kind of break apart some more. So you're just trying to keep it from having really big pieces. To make gravy, you need some kind of broth. And so this is turkey broth that I have frozen. I poured the turkey broth into little containers, and then when they're frozen, I pop them out and put them in a bag. So this is homemade broth. You can have, you know, box broth, or you can even use a bouillon or bouillon cubes. That is the basis of a gravy, is some kind of a broth. What you need to do is you need to thicken the broth. And we're gonna discuss two ways to do that. You can thicken a broth with cornstarch, and you can thicken a broth with a little bit of butter and some flour. We'll start with the cornstarch method. I'm going to actually use the homemade broth that I have, and this is just the turkey broth, or the broth that was left over from when we cooked a turkey. Because I'm using a frozen broth, there's kind of a slightly added step, and that step is that I have to thaw it. Obviously, if you use like this, you can just pour it in. It's a liquid. If you're using this, you would have to mix the water and the bouillon. I know that this is about 2 cups of broth because I know that each one of the cubes is about 1/3 of a cup. When I saved this broth, I did not bother to strain it, and so there's little bits of turkey in it. I like that in my broth. If you don't, then before you freeze it, if you were to, you know, freeze it, then you should probably strain it. We're making our broth with the cornstarch. This makes a huge difference. And it says it right on here, but people just don't bother to read the directions. Mix it with a little cold water until smooth, and then gradually stir into the hot liquid until blended. Stir occasionally, boil 1 minute. Mixing the cornstarch with water first, super important. I usually get some kind of a small little cup, how much cornstarch do we use? You use 1 tablespoon for each cup of liquid. That's generally what they recommend. I actually think that sometimes that makes it a little thicker than I like, but not immediately, just in the end it makes it thicker. If it's still super hot, it's not thick. Something else that you need to remember about cornstarch is even after you've mixed it up, just before you put it in, you mix it again, because if you let it set for very long, it will settle to the bottom of the liquid, and then you're gonna have lumps again. So make sure you stir it truly moments before you add it. When you're pouring the cornstarch in, and you have both hands and you're not actually holding a camera, you're supposed to stir it as you pour it in. It works better, but it worked okay. Now we're supposed to boil it for about a minute. I had turned down the heat on it. It was on a slow boil, but I had turned down the heat on it while I was getting the cornstarch ready. And so I'm going to adjust the temperature up just a little bit so that it starts boiling. And this whole minute, I am going to stir. I am not going to stop because something happened, or the dog barked, or whatever else, because I can guarantee every single time that I have stopped for something like that, it's burned to the bottom of the pan. So, stir it the entire minute. At the end of the minute, you can see that it's still pretty runny, but that's because it's so hot. It actually thickens up as it cools down. This is thicker than what it was before, but it is not a thick gravy at this point. Like I said, it's just too hot. It has to cool down a little bit before it thickens up. So I'm just gonna add about half of the turkey. This is something that you can scoop up and put on top of rice or potatoes or noodles. When you make a gravy using the butter and flour method, you start a little bit differently because you start with the butter. I have 2 tablespoons of butter here. For each tablespoon of butter, you'll use a tablespoon of flour. And it's a 1-1-1 ratio. So 1 tablespoon of butter, 1 tablespoon of flour, 1 cup of broth. And since I'm using 2 tablespoons of butter, I'll use 2 tablespoons of flour and 2 cups of broth. Over a medium heat, you want to melt the butter in the pan. I always want to try and get it across the middle, and I can't. I got it. Sort of. I don't have the whole thing covered, but I'm close. Yeah, because this is what I have to do with my food to make it fun. I have to play with it. So melt the butter, and now we're going to do 2 tablespoons of flour quickly. And we're going to stir it up. And so we added our broth. Now as it melts, we'll just keep it mixing in with the butter and flour. Once the broth has melted fully, and so it's all in liquid form, you'll want to bring it to a boil, and you'll need to make sure that you are careful about keeping it stirred. You don't have to stir it every moment, but you need to be very careful while you bring it to a boil. This is kind of a rolling boil where when you're stirring it, you can see that it stays boiling. So you want to do that, and you want to boil it for 1 minute. And you want to stir it the entire time. After you've let it boil for a minute, then you turn the heat off, and we'll add the rest of the turkey. So now that we have the turkey added, this is all set. And again, it's hot, and so the liquid seems soupy, but it will thicken up as it cools off. And I can tell, it may not be as obvious on the camera, but I can tell that it's not the same thickness. It is definitely thicker than it was before, and it will continue to thicken up as it kind of cools down a little bit. By the time that it's a temperature that you could actually eat, it will be thicker. And it does look like I added a little bit more to the first batch of the turkey than I did to this one, and so this one's a little runnier, but I don't mind. I like both. And here are both batches. This is our second batch with the butter and flour, and like I said, I didn't add as much turkey to this one, so it's a little runnier. And here's the first batch. And actually this one isn't as runny also because it's cooled down now, but this is the first batch that we did with cornstarch.